there, if I'm counting correctly.
That Susan is a very active and excellent board.
Maybe not. Yeah, no, I think we're good. Good morning, everybody. Happy middle of March. Spring, not spring. It's nice to see you all. We'll go ahead and get started with our agenda. Is there any adjustments to our agenda? Does anybody have any adjustments they need to make? Okay, seeing none, we'll go ahead and open it up for public comment. Is there any member of the public here that would like to make a comment?
No members of the public in the boardroom.
Okay, thanks. Go ahead, Chapin.
Time I should speak on this, which is just to say I can't, as a member of the public, I can't support ending the number 10 entirely as is proposed. And also I just worry about how much Williston's assessment will need to be reduced and how the net effect may not be what we wish for. So thanks.
Thank you for those comments.
I should introduce myself. I'm Chapin Kaner, a resident of Williston, an ex-member of this board. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for those comments. Any other members of the public want to make a comment? Okay, seeing none, we will go on to the consent agenda. I'm looking for a motion to accept the consent agenda.
I move we accept the consent agenda.
Thanks.
I will second.
Thanks, Catherine. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Thanks, Sasha. Any opposed? Abstention, sorry. It's still early. Okay. So we will move on. The consent agenda is approved. We will move on to discussing our public transit agency safety plan. That is all you, John Moore.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. This should be a pretty quick one, I hope. But just as a recap, way back in 2018, the FTA set a new requirement for all or most transit agencies to have a safety plan. GMT was subject to that. There was about a 2-year implementation period. So the GMT board approved our initial plan back in November 2020. As part of that plan, there is an annual review and update requirement. The last time that happened was September 2023. So we are off a year. As we prepare for our FTA triennial review, we want to make sure we're current in all of our plan updates. So what we're asking for this morning is a board approval of the most recent updates. I will say that the Urban Safety Committee did review the plan in April 2024. We did mean to bring it to the board at that time and just got kind of lost in the shuffle, but better late than never. The Safety Committee spent 2 meetings. Number one, kind of learning about the safety requirement and more importantly, the safety management system, which is kind of the nuts and bolts of the plan. And then another meeting, deciding if there needs to be any updates. And there was none recommended by the Urban Safety Committee back in April 2024. As required by regulation in the plan, Clayton and I met a few weeks ago and decided that we have no other proposed updates to the board besides the date and the version number. So that are the only 2 updates. I will quickly say that the plan does include multiple safety performance targets. And those get rolled up into a larger report that will coordinate with the CCRPC, the Regional Planning Commission. Those safety targets are based on our National Transit Database data that we report annually. Those do need to be updated, and that will be part of the next review and update. But for today, the only changes we're proposing are the version number and the date. Happy to answer any questions, but looking for a motion to approve the most updated version.
Anybody have any questions for John? Go ahead, Susan. It's early in the morning. It's okay.
I know, sorry, get myself off organized here. So I just had a quick question. Under the safety performance targets, which is on page 19. I'm sorry, I could probably know these, but I don't. So mode of transit service, motor bus, CB, DRDO, DRPT. Can you just run through those quickly?
Yeah, they make it as complicated as possible. So there's really two main modes that we, well, three modes that we provide under the NTD definitions. MB is motor bus, so fixed route. DR is demand response. So in Chittenden County, that's the ADA service. In the rural areas, it's the O&D service. And then CB is commuter bus, so the Lynx and the Milton commuter. And then on top of that, there's a couple of subcategories. DO is directly operated, so we directly operate most of our service. And then PT is purchase transportation. So the only purchase transportation we have is the ADA service, which we contract to SSTA. So three main modes, and then there's subcategories if we operate directly or if we contract that service out.
Okay, great. And then the actual targets are determined by the National Public Transportation Safety Plan?
They provide very little guidance and give a lot of leeway to the actual transit providers to set those targets. So those targets in our plan are based on a 3-year average of those categories. And that is kind of the best practice methodology to determine those. What we need to do is look at more recent data to see if there's been any changes in what we've actually reported to the NTD, and then coordinate with the CCRPC to see if we need to make any updates, from that more recent data.
So the targets are our actual 3-year averages?
Correct. And,
Okay.
and they don't need to be, but that's definitely one of the options laid out in the regulations. And from what I've seen, kind of the most common practice is to use, some historic data to set future targets.
Okay, and do we as a board, I'm sorry, but do we see these, a comparison of how we're doing compared to these targets? Is that something that comes across our agenda?
Not recently. I think as the performance committee looks at a performance dashboard, those would be, obvious metrics that, should be reported back to the board.
Yeah, I would be curious to see how we're doing against our targets and whether we think those are the targets we should be setting. So, thank you.
So it sounds like a request to make sure that this is part of performance committee work. Any other questions or comments? Thanks, Susan. Thanks, John, for all the details. All right, we're looking for a motion to approve.
I'll move to approve the updated Public Transportation Agency Safety Plan.
Thanks, Andrea. Is there a second? Thanks, Bob. All right. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Or abstain? All right, we have an approved safety plan. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Just pull my agenda back up here, see where we're going next. All right, June 2025 service modifications. It says, Chris, are you going to kick it off?
Yep, I can go ahead and get started. Morning, everyone. So yeah, as I put in the memo, today we're looking for approval for the June 2025 service reductions. That includes adjustments to the 8, the summer schedule, which we've talked about on the 4 core routes, the changing from the number 10 to sort of the old number 4, Sunday service combinations in Burlington, and the elimination of the number 11 airport route on Sundays. We've talked about these particular cuts over the past few months. One thing that I just did want to highlight that I also put in the memo is the board had asked previously for an analysis of how both these service cuts as well as the previous service cuts that the board has approved already would impact our stick factors. As noted in the memo, these do not impact the 4 that we have historically gotten. And one thing to note is that it does put us closer to a 5th stick factor, which last year was valued at $225,000. So, you know, while it's obviously not great to be cutting service from that particular perspective, we're moving in the right direction of sort of moving away from less efficient service and trying to keep the service as whole as possible. So that's all I have, you know, really for presentation for today. You know, I know we've talked about this at length, but happy to answer any other questions that board members have.
Questions? I just want to echo Chapin Kaner's concerns about the 10. It has low ridership, and so I get why it's there, but it really, 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 really reduces Williston's access, and it is a bummer. Go ahead, Susan.
I was just curious, how many stops are there along the number 10 from, what is it? Is it Taft's Corner to Five Corners?
I think looking roughly, it looks like 5 or 6 stops in both directions, sort of between the Taft's Corners intersection and the bridge going to the Five Corners.
I was just wondering, like, if there were just a single stop at some central location in that Taft's Corner area, just to Five Corners, if that is of any value. I know it would still add a lot of time, but just to have a, you know, just a direct one commercial area to then another, if there was value in preserving that without the intermediate stops.
Yeah, I mean, it's really, you know, we didn't look at that particular scenario, Susan. But I think, you know, one of the things that we're really trying to do is, as I think I talked about at the last meeting, you know, 70% of the ridership on the 10 is in the sort of Essex area. And one of the things that we're struggling with is meeting the needs of the students who ride that service. And so with the sort of 30-minute service that we're looking at in the AM peak and the PM peak, we're able to actually meet the needs on both ends of the day, because right now we're not meeting the needs in both directions for that particular population.
Yeah, I guess I get that. It does seem like such a loss, though, to have this connection between these important commercial, you know, areas and to be eliminating that. So just something, I guess, to keep in mind as we move forward.
Thanks. Go ahead, Charlene.
I don't know how entirely to form this. I am really, really sad about reduction in the number 10 bus, but at the same time, I live right on that route and I find it impossible to use. The travel times are too far between. It doesn't really time well. And I also can't seem to make, like, ideally, one should be able to ride it to Walmart, turn around and get to downtown. I can't make the app make it do that for me, even though I know in theory it should work. So I'm really sad about losing it, but I also I want to use it and I can't seem to make it work. So I can't even imagine somebody who's not as dedicated as I am trying to make it work, how they could possibly use it more without major improvements, but we can't make improvements until people are using it, and that's not happening. There's such a huge population base towards the end of it, but getting on that bus is just, it doesn't work. That's it. Wasn't very coherent, but I just had to word dump that.
Thanks. And I see there's a question in the chat or a comment or a pondering. And does this change how we serve the park and ride at the Williston Park and Ride?
Right now, not necessarily. I think we're still trying to explore ways for the number one, to try and figure out as we sort of have the new normal of the sort of reduced link schedule and other adjustments. I think we're still trying to figure out ways to connect the one and the Wilson Park ride to make that connection.
Okay. Chapin and then Charlene. Oh, Charlene, you want to finish? Sorry, Chapin.
I've wondered a number of times if it would be possible to take the number one and loop it across Paul. I think it's Paul Street. So it loops around Blair Park. It catches that last little part. There's already a bus stop that's covered in front of the Finney crossings, and pick up a little tiny bit of what would have been number 10 loop. I don't know if that maybe could be part of the reimaging of one. It would add a couple of minutes, but maybe get some of those houses in that intense development and make that a possible thing to try and pick up some of that. But again, unformed, and I don't know what to do with that.
No, I think that's great, Shirley. I think one thing to note, we didn't want to make too many changes on the one. I think that's potentially coming down in the future. I think that's an opportunity where we can sort of look at all those different options of sort of where's the routing best served.
I've been watching that one really carefully because it would still catch the Blair Park in that corner and only cut off a little tiny loop that I don't think is a very viable loop right now and potentially get it. That's the best one I've come up with every day when I ride the bus and I ponder.
Thanks. And Chris, thanks for listening to the suggestions. Chapin, go ahead. Chapin Spencer.
Thanks, Amy. Good memo. Thank you. This has been a long time coming, hard step for us all to make. But given the financial situation, a necessary step. The one question I have is to how this impacts staffing in FY26 versus how we are staffed currently. Could staff management let us know how that would be in terms of driver staffing?
Okay. So one of the things that I'm happy to report, which I would normally not be happy to report, is that since we've had some departures from drivers, we would not have to consider a layoff action for these reductions. And so right now we're actually having people stretched a bit with overtime to cover everything. And these reductions will get us more right size to our current staffing level.
Okay, thank you.
Any other discussions about the full list? I know we've been talking about the 10, but any other comments or questions about the rest? I know we've talked about them in the past. Catherine.
Thanks, Amy. When you look at the map, my mind was going to the same places that we were just talking about. Could you reimagine the other routes? And Chris, you did note some potential changes to the one. Could you just remind me the time frame of that and when we would be thinking about or considering that as a board?
Yep. So for other future service changes, the plan is to present sort of an overview at the April board meeting with a final determination by the board in May. And just, we need that timeline for us so that, we can work on sort of the internal pieces behind that for an August implementation. So over the next few months, you'll be hearing on other changes as well.
Thank you.
The items that I can bring up that may be relevant for the discussion is that, as folks know, we have a roughly $3 million gap in fiscal year 27. We have heard from VTrans a desire that we meet them halfway with our reductions or new revenue, and so that if we would do another $1.5 million worth of reductions for fiscal year 27, that they would try to get the other $1.5 million. Whether or not they're able to deliver on that, I think, is a big question. But just as a reminder that pretty much as soon as we heard from Chris, as soon as we wrap up our fiscal year 26 reductions, we're going to be starting on reductions for the future. So this is not the end of the reduction discussions.
Okay. Chapin?
just quickly, that totally understood, Clayton. Thanks for the context. And as part of that, I'm really hoping to see a revenue enhancement strategy, whether it's, around the fees or rider policy. How the assessment formula reconfig. I think there's probably some opportunity here, and I'm hoping that whether it's the finance committee or where that sits, that we have a revenue evaluation internally to see what options exist there as well.
Agreed.
I was only going to add my 2 cents about the right side of the Route 10, the number 10 route, is that the distance between Tap Corners and Five Corners is relatively short, and at least between kind of Industrial Ave and Essex, there is pedestrian infrastructure. So it is not, for many people, it is an achievable, walkable, or bikeable distance, not for all. But just wanted to add that at least there's that. Thanks for the thumbs up. Okay. So we are looking for an action, a sad action on changes to these routes, the 2025 service modifications. Looking for someone to make that motion.
Make the motion. I move that we approve the proposed service changes as outlined in the March 1825 board packet with an implementation date of Monday, June 16, 2025.
Thanks, Mike.
And I'll second
that. Thanks, Susan. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, more service reductions. Thanks for all the thoughtful conversation and the planning that's going into this. I appreciate it. Next up on the agenda is the FY24 audit. So I'm going to pass that to Nick to kick off with the sunshine in his face.
Yeah, sorry. Good morning, everyone. You will find on your packet, excuse me, from page 46 to 106, the audit, our management letter, the SAS 114 letter, and my finance update. But the auditors are here today. We did review this in finance committee. The finance committee did recommend approval to the full board. I just, kind of the big highlights, we did receive an unmodified opinion, which is a good thing. There were a couple management letter comments, which the auditor can go through, but no disagreements with management to report or anything like that. So all in all, staff is very happy with the audit. We're happy to go through a PowerPoint with you if you really feel strongly about that. But we already did that with finance committee, but just I kind of want to take a straw poll if that's something you folks wanted, or maybe if you wanted to just ask some questions about the audit, but I'll leave that up to you. And the auditor and myself are happy to, answer any questions you might have.
I'd be interested, not being on the finance committee.
Sure.
I don't know who else. Thank you.
Well, why don't we can kind of give you the shortened version of it. It's not a very long PowerPoint. Heather, would you like to pull up the PowerPoint and we'll go through that?
Absolutely.
So sorry, I forgot to introduce our auditors from RHR Smith. Today we have Sam Oganoff as well as Heather Hunter.
Are you able to see the presentation?
I can see it.
Okay, perfect. Good morning, everybody. I'm Heather Hunter. I'm the audit director, and Sam Oganoff is here with me. He is the audit manager on this particular audit. And we will start, as Nick mentioned, you had a clean audit opinion. It's the highest opinion that you can get. There were no modifications to the opinion. So that is obviously a an accreditation to your financial team there and the ability to work within the confines of GAAP and GASB and FASB for all the regulations that we have to follow in quasi-governmental organizations as well. Nick mentioned there were 2 management letters. One is on cash disbursements, just kind of keeping in mind to pay those within the terms agreed upon. That way it avoids any penalties or interest fees that you may incur. And then the other piece, which I understand has already been corrected, to include some verbiage in the subrecipient agreement to make sure that is in compliance with your grant obligations that you have taken part in. Again, both of those, although they are best practices, you know, in the whole scheme of things, those are not as critical comments as we've seen in other clients. So again, it's accreditation to your financial team there. This is the statement of net position. It's kind of taking all of your entity and putting it on the balance sheet, showing solvency for your entire entity. Looking at that, you had total assets of $48,354,209. Cash obviously is very healthy at this point. It also includes your net assets, which those net assets are net of depreciation. So it's kind of the net worth of those assets at $37.7 million. Conversely, jumping down to net position, that's kind of your net worth as an entity for the entirety, totals $44.7 million. Of that amount, 4.55 is considered unrestricted. That's the availability to use as the board sees fit. It may help provide offsets to future budgets and so forth. Your restricted portion allows you to fund your local share of grants and operating grants that you have coming due in the future. These slides tend to show comparative over the last 3 years. So you see your cash has fluctuated for the last 3 years. You know, you hit a low last year and you've kind of recovered from that between the 2 operating routes. Accounts receivable in this case has climbed as a primarily result in balances owed to you from intergovernmental revenues of $5.6 million. And then your liability side of the house, those amounts that are owed to outside parties. So clearly the fluctuation in accounts payable has decreased almost by half in the last 3 years at 1.16. And then your accrued compensation, that is the amount that's owed for accrued sick, vacation, and so forth based upon your personnel policies and union contracts. And that's totaling just over $1 million this year. This is the comparative, the fund balance that I was sharing with you. We break that down into 3 components: restricted fund balance, which has hovered right around $2 million. In this case, we're right at $2 million. Your unrestricted, that flexible pot of money, if you will, is at $1.3 million. And then your net invested in capital assets. In this case, that's obviously your lion's share of your fund balance at $33.6 million. And that is shown separate because those are not liquid assets to be able to fund current operations. So we are required to show those in a whole separate category. Those are your buses, your infrastructure, those types of items. And I should have highlighted that was for the urban portion of your operations. The rural side of the house you have those same three categories, but in this case, your restricted fund balance is about $388,000. Your unrestricted and this portion of your operations allows for the greatest flexibility at $3.2 million. And then the net investment and capitalized items is $4.2 million, clearly reflecting recent purchases in those assets. The statement of activities for your organization, this is your P&L or your profit and loss for your entity. In this particular case, you will see it's broken down between your urban and rural routes with a total, and then that total is compared to FY23. I will point out the operating income in this case. That's the first benchmark that we look at for the urban route. Right now, you are not covering your operating expenses. So you have a loss for that route of $61,000. If you continue down to your other non-operating adjustments, you will see that continues to have a deficit balance all the way through. But you did have, based upon capital grants, you were able to recover some of that for a net change of $6.7 million on your urban operations. Your rural operations tend to be more affluent, and it allows you some financial flexibility. It also helps cash flow the entire organization. So your operating income here is at $660,000. Taking into consideration your non-operating, your capital contributions, you had the $3.2 million an increase in net position. So in totality, you had $9.9 million that you were able to increase your net position for operations, recognizing the bulk of this is coming through your capital grants and that you saw on your fund balance purchases. This is kind of a pie chart to distinguish where your revenues are coming from. You know, it is not unusual for transit committees to have the bulk of their revenue, if not, you know, the large majority of their revenue coming from grants, intergovernmental revenues of a variety of types. And, you know, Green Mountain Transit is no different in this capacity. Likewise, you know, you're pretty much have one category for operating expenses, and that's providing transportation services. And you can see how that's climbed over the years, again, with increased fuel costs, labor costs, and so forth. You are in line with other transit committees, and you know, you're making the hard choices, as we saw on earlier agenda items, that likewise other transit committees are having to take. And it's balancing that service and ridership with the cost of offering those. So it is in the budget that, you know, I can empathize with your decisions. So that kind of is a nutshell of the presentation that we provided. And I'd be happy, and Sam Oganoff is on this call as well, to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you for that. And Tasha, I'm glad you asked for that. It's really helpful. I know finance gets it, but I'm not on finance either. So it is a nice connection to all that detail. Questions?
I've got my hand up.
Oh, there it is. Okay, Tasha.
Sorry.
I'm scrolling around.
Thanks so much for that. Heather, I do have a question. You mentioned that rural was able to cash flow the organization, and I'd just like to understand that better.
If you want, Heather, I can take that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Nick, whatever.
Yeah. Essentially, rural funds the cash flow. The working capital of rural is very good because we get a lot of upfronts from the state, as well as it has a much larger unrestricted net position than the urban side does. The urban side, we get fewer upfronts from the state. And we also are 2 months behind in billing, and the size of the operating expenses on the urban side dwarf the size of the rural. So what happens is rural really, the cash flow and the unrestricted net position of that division, floats the urban side. And that's why I've spoken about, if we do choose to separate, we're going to have to figure out how we support the urban's need for, a substantial amount of cash flow. And I will be bringing a line of credit, hopefully next month, to the board for approval in preparation of that possibly happening.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Catherine.
I had a question about the accrued time off liability and just the increasing size of that liability, and that's detailed on page 22 in note 4. I'll just express an overall concern about the size of that liability, especially in comparison to our unrestricted fund balance. For me, that is a priority that we need to get a handle on, if there is any way to do that, that this board has any control over. And I'm just curious, from the auditor's perspective, if that size of that liability is out of the norm, or is that within the norm, or is there no norm? And then my question for staff is, if we were to separate, what portion of that liability would GMT need to pay for employees who moved on to a new employer? And was that considered in the cost review of the potential split? And you may not have the answer to that question right now, but that's a question I would have.
So I will at least address your first part of your question, that compensated absences fluctuate significantly from organization to organization. So although it is not uncommon, you still have, particularly with the various union environments, those organizations, including local governments, tend to have higher compensated absence balances. The good news, unless you, as Nick mentioned, unless you split operations, from year to year, you are only booking the change in those compensated absence balances. But in case the policies themselves don't change, that is something that, with wage increases, obviously that balance is going to grow. Conversely, as turnover occurs, whether it's from true turnover or retirements, that will allow that balance to decrease. So having that at least on your balance sheet, there are some that haven't booked that completely. So, we are required with new regulations to book that fully. And that's a big number for some organizations to swallow. So it's a good thing to just keep tabs on, that's for sure.
And when we do the payouts, are those included in the indirect for the time that the payout is made, or is that carried separately and accounted for differently?
Sorry, in the indirect rate, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, is that considered an expense in the indirect?
Well, for the administrative staff, it would be, and we accrue, as people accrue the CTO, we expense it, and then as they use it, we offset it. So it's accounted for. The CTO is essentially, we relieve the liability that's been accrued and then reduce the wages so we don't double expense it. But I don't want to we can talk offline if you want to better understand how we treat the accounting for compensated absences. A couple things on CTO. So we've had, what's amazing is, even with the growth in that liability, like we had $100,000 of cash outs this fiscal or in FY24, and we had over 200,000 in the years before that, and the liability still grew. Wage increases are impactful, right? Because it resets the amount, as the auditor said. As well as when I went to a conference and realized that we were not accounting for other things that we should be putting in the liability. So when it comes to retirement match and payroll taxes, we have to also set aside fund or put that as part of the liability as well. So that grew the liability in 1 year quite a bit because we hadn't been accounting for those items. So that's a one-time effect. So, you know, we hopefully won't see growth that large in the future, but I've said many, many times, this is one of the big items for GMT that is very costly, especially when you have an hourly workforce, because with salary folks, you know, I go on vacation, you're not hiring someone to do my job, right? But if a driver goes on vacation, we're paying someone overtime to come in, and it's very costly. So, but it's part of the union contract, and you know, that's taken care of in obviously negotiations.
I think Catherine had a second part of her question about what happens if the rural goes.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. The rural share of that, Catherine, is about $258,000. And I have shared those numbers with VTrans. My expectation would be if that was transferred, either the liability would be transferred along with some assets likely, or they would be paid out in full for the CTO. So.
Thank you. Other questions about the audit? And if there are no questions about the audit, we do need a motion to accept it.
I'll make a motion.
Thanks, Tasha. There's a second. Chapin, are you seconding, or you have a question? You're seconding. Second. Apparently I can't say that. Any further discussion? Yes. Oh, sorry, Chapin and then Catherine.
Yes, would it be friendly to hear from Paul as chair of the Finance Committee on the Finance Committee's review?
Sure.
Basically, the Finance Committee heard the similar report as the full board heard, and there's acceptance by the committee, and the committee recommends that the full board adopt the audit.
Thanks, Paul, and thanks for asking that, Chapin. Catherine.
Just a quick note that I think we need to make sure the motion is to accept the audit and the management letter, since they are two separate items.
That's the motion I meant to make, Catherine.
I was sure that you did. I just wanted to make sure.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Chapin, is that comfortable with you? Okay. So we have a motion to accept both the audit and the management letter. If there's no further discussion, I'll ask all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Abstentions? Okay. Thank you so
Very
much. Heather, thank you to you and Sam for being here.
Yes, have a wonderful day.
You too. Jamie, we are getting two-factor authentication for our board emails, which is so exciting.
Yes, very exciting. So it's listed as a training. It's not really a training. This is just an opportunity for me to let you all know that our IT coordinator, Scott Ballard, is working on turning two-factor authentication on for all board emails. Your emails are all listed on our website, and as a result, there's lots of phishing attempts. Like, people can see your email, they're really open to the public, but it's a complicated process given that a majority of you forward your GMT email to other email addresses. So in the next week and a half, you'll hear from myself or from Scott with directions on how to log into your GMT email, how to accept the two-factor authentication. There's some, if you're Google users now, there's some changes that Google's making. So right now they allow for text messaging and some other ways to accept two-factor. Those will be changing. And so Scott has delayed this. He turned it on briefly, and I know some of you had some issues. So I'm sorry for that, Austin and Charlene, for some of the issues that you had with your email, but it's now turned off and we're hoping to be able to turn it back on around April 1st. So in the next week and a half, you'll hear from us. As well as, there'll be a path forward for you to ask questions and to get help from Scott. So this is, again, not really a training, just a warning. And you'll hear from us.
Great. Thanks, Jamie. And I appreciate all the attempts to continue to make GMT a safer place, right, from phishing and spam and all that horrible stuff. So thank you.
Sure.
Thank you for the offer to be open when those of us like myself who are not tech savvy fall into a panic and need help.
We'll give you like a screenshot, how to. So hopefully it's really easy to follow.
Great. Thanks.
Sure.
Okay, we are moving right along. And we will be talking next about our 5339. I don't have my glasses on. Grant application. I'm going to toss that over to Matt, I think, to kick us off. Hi, Matt.
Good morning. So yes, I'll start by noting that we have not received a notice of funding opportunity from the FTA about the 5339 competitive grant program, which has two forms. There's the Lono program that has been used to get electric buses and infrastructure. And then there's a bus and bus facilities, which is geared more towards regular combustion engine buses, as well as general facility rehab projects. So we have been working over the previous few months on with our A&E consultants on some order of design magnitude for several facility improvement projects that have been identified in our capital needs assessment and our 5-year capital plan to try to get the federal funding to support those projects. And so with the NOFO not being released, we're unsure of what the actual timeline will be for the application. And with this administration, there's also a question on whether a NOFO will even be released. So there'll be more discussion to come, but we did want to get this on the agenda to share our plans for this application so that the board can weigh in on any other items or changes that they'd like to see before the final application is submitted. So I will go into the project slate that we've been considering here. So first off is replacing all of the HVAC equipment that is original to the building construction back in 1996. And this includes 3 large makeup air handlers, 2 serving the bus storage garage and 1 serving the maintenance shop, as well as 4 rooftop units, which serve the admin area. All those, particularly the makeup air units, are past their useful life, and we really need to focus on getting those replaced as soon as we possibly can. The next item is replacing our automatic bus wash system at the facility. So the current system that we have is over 10 years old. It has some functionality issues from the very beginning, such as the wash water reclamation system that's never really worked the way that it's supposed to. So we haven't been able to fully take advantage of all the features of that system. The other issue is that as this system ages, it becomes increasingly unreliable. And the manufacturer of this system does not have a service presence on the East Coast. They're a West Coast company. So service calls can be quite expensive with delayed service timelines. So as this system has aged, it's become a larger issue, troubleshooting and addressing issues that pop up with the system. So we've evaluated some different wash systems with other agencies in Vermont. Our maintenance team and our capital projects manager took a trip down to Advanced Transit and Southeast Vermont Transit to look at their wash systems and talk about their experiences there. So we've identified some other options that will better suit our needs. And so we're going to seek funding to replace the wash system. And we may also look to recite this within the garage to improve the wash and fueling bay layout inside the garage. Next item would be improving some lighting and HVAC building controls through the use of a building management system that will give us better functionality. Our systems are extremely outdated at the moment, and this will also allow us to program these in such a way that we can make it better to get some energy savings through more effective climate control capabilities and lighting timing. Next item would be improving the exterior driver corridor. We have the new driver break room in the old general manager's office downstairs. This is utilizing the walkway in front of the courtyard between the break room and the front of the bus garage. So improving that corridor with a covered walkway across the existing sidewalk. There's a concrete pad in front of the wash bay exit. We would seek to replace that with a new concrete pad that has an integrated ice melt system to avoid slip and falls. The main entrance to the bus garage on that side of the building, there's some pretty significant corrosion issues with the framing of that door system, so we would seek to address those. And we're also looking at installing a vestibule inside the new driver break room, as that exterior door does not have a vestibule, so that leads to issues with heat escape through use of that door in the winter months. So those are that's the project slate that's currently under consideration. I will note that the final application package could include other items such as replacement diesel buses. We have 3 diesel buses identified in the FY26 capital budget. So we could add those to the final application. We're also considering some other projects like a rapid rise overhead door system to overhaul our existing overhead doors in the bus garage. That one's currently slated as more of a maybe, just because we're cognizant of the project slate that we've given to the A&E consultants, so we want to make sure that we do not overload them and risk not having materials together for a final application package. Timeline of these activities, our A&E team is looking to have their design work finalized by the end of this month. Those materials are going to be provided over to a cost estimator who will provide us with order of magnitude pricing, which will inform our application ask. And so that will likely take place in early April. So we do not have cost figures for you at the moment, but I would say those facility items above would fall below $1 million, likely in the $500,000 to $600,000 range. But we will have more developed cost figures. So I would say with the fact that there's no NOFO announced at this time, we can have a future agenda item at the April board. I don't think the timeline's going to prohibit us from further discussion. We just wanted to have this preliminary discussion so that we're not dropping this on the board at the last minute with an application due in a matter of days. So I'll turn it over now to any questions. Yeah, I don't think there's anything else.
Thank you for that. And I really do appreciate the early discussion, early kind of bringing us into the thought process. It makes the repetition of it makes those decisions certainly much easier. So I appreciate that process. I know that we've been working for a couple of years to do that, and I appreciate it. Any questions from Matt? Catherine, you look like you're going to make a question. No, you're just sitting up. Okay. Posture is important.
Amy, I think now perhaps would be a good time. Matt, could you talk to us a little bit about the recent news with our past Lono grants and what that change means?
Yes. So last week, the Secretary of Transportation announced that the Department of Transportation will be reviewing all unobligated grant awards within the FTA for and I don't have the exact wording in front of me, but essentially compliance with the administrative's objectives. They listed several things that they view as on the chopping block, and they did highlight electric vehicles and electric vehicle infrastructure as those. Unfortunately, that applies to all of the Lono awards to the state of Vermont going back to 2022. So VTrans, in light of this news, they are working with the FTA to revise the project slate for those Lono awards to cover existing commitments, and that those commitments are what's already been paid. The 5 electric buses that we received at the end of last year, or middle of last year, the charging infrastructure that's been installed, and as well as some training obligations that have already been made. But everything else in those awards, it does not seem as the state nor we are expecting that those funds are going to be available to us to further the electrification program. The state's objective is to request that those awards be revised to allow for the purchase of diesel buses. So there's more to come on that. So we may be eliminating the electric buses from our FY20. Well, we will be in the next agenda item proposing to eliminate the electric buses from the FY26 capital budget. And we may seek to right size with more diesel bus replacements to keep our fleet in a state of good repair. Clayton, anything I missed in that?
No, I just think that it's, important for the board to know that we've been working for years on a carbon reduction strategy, and with this change last week, it's a very sudden, pivot in a different direction. And I know that a lot of our staff have worked, hundreds of hours on this, moving in this direction. And so I know some folks are feeling the whiplash of the change.
Whiplash doesn't seem accurate enough to describe it. Go ahead, Chief and Spencer.
Yes, I'd welcome staff's and maybe VTrans's insight on this change. And does staff and VTrans agree that we have no choice in this direction, and that this is the path forward, at least for the short term, to seek authorization to shift the acquisition from electric to diesel, cleaner diesel?
So I'm not sure if there's anybody from VTrans on the call right now. The awards are made to the state of Vermont. They're not made to Green Mountain Transit. So really we can just provide input on how those grants get obligated, but that's really out of our control. This was Ross McDonald sent email to all providers at the end of last week outlining that this was going to be their strategy with the FTA to get those grants programmed. I think we're forecasting the administration's temperature with respect to these federal grant awards, and expecting that we're not going to get a lot of leeway from them on continuing electrification when they've been pretty outspoken against electrification within the industry. Clayton, do you have anything to add to that?
That was exactly what I was going to say, that unfortunately neither Ross or Dan are able to join us today. But that seems to be, our state administration's direction.
Okay, thank you.
Susan, and then Andrea.
Yeah, I heard you say that we were talking about grants that we've received since, or the state's received since 2022. Do you have an idea of what % of all of that funding is unobligated?
My understanding is that all of it is unobligated. 2022, 2023, and 2024's Lono awards.
So I don't understand much about how all of that money gets obligated and what's normal, but is that the situation that most states are in with regards to their funding?
I could not tell you if that's common across. I will say that we GMT do not have any awards that old that have been unobligated. I don't want to speak on behalf of VTrans when they're not here. Yeah.
Okay.
But we're in the process right now, in reading Ross's letter, it sounded like he was asking for information about the amount of funds that have been spent by GMT or by all the transit agencies.
Yes.
So we're spending money that's not obligated. I guess that's where I'm confused.
So our understanding is that VTrans has been using state funds to pay out those projects that have been ongoing. They're going to try and recruit. Their strategy is to try and get the federal awards obligated to cover those, so that they're not paying the burden of those costs with state funds. But yes, you're exactly right, Susan. They were paying out payments to us for buses that we bought with what appears to be just state funds at this time, without the federal grants obligated.
Okay, well, on the surface, this is just so frustrating to hear.
Go ahead,
You know,
Andrea.
and
Sorry.
If I could just add to that, and I'm hesitant to discuss this too much without VTrans here. You know, the real question to me is that there's about $11 million that we believe has been spent, about 8 million of which from GMT, that has come from state funds. And what we don't know is how much those funds are necessary for the fiscal year 26 or 27 budgets. And so if those funds are not allowed to be obligated, it could have a cascading impact on the whole transit system, though, you know, within Vermont.
Thank you for that additional information, Clayton.
Go ahead, Andrea.
Clayton just answered my question. So thank you.
All right. I'm really feeling very dumbfounded. I'm not really sure what to say. The cascading impact of this is probably enormous, and then some, that we're not thinking through. And understand that GMT's position is dependent on VTrans, that we don't have a lot of sway or influence or decision in this. That feels very pessimistic. And I don't know, maybe perhaps I'm missing something, but the looks on everyone's faces says I'm not, which not only puts our funding at risk and our finances at risk, but also kind of efficiency and our environmental strategy that we were putting forward. Sorry, soapboxing it for a second.
No, this news was quite a shock to everybody. So yeah, you're absolutely right, Amy.
I think that, you know, one of the things that's hard for me to keep in mind is that I'm trying to, there's two parallel tracks. There's the track where FTA agrees to reimburse the state that $11 million, and that the remaining, you know, $19 million that had been, you know, put aside for electric buses, we could just shift to diesel. And if that's the case, it actually will, you know, there will be a lot more buses, which will really help GMT's, you know, fleet, you know, needs. And so in the one direction, we have, you know, a pretty positive scenario. And the other direction, it's a scenario where, wow, we have to go back and revisit our service reductions because suddenly, you know, the funding that we were expecting from the state's not going to be there. And it seems like there's maybe nothing in between, you know, either it's gonna be really good or it's gonna be really bad. And we'll talk a little bit about this with the next item as well.
Okay. Any other further discussion on this? I'm trying to think what the other next item is. Okay. I will just add that, you know, to continue to achieve kind of carbon or energy efficiency gains, what's within our control is getting more riders onto those buses so that we have more full buses and more people are using them, because that's certainly more efficient than single car. Not as efficient as walking and biking, but you know what I'm saying. So we do have some control over trying to get more people on those buses. Okay, soapbox down. Our next item is our FY26 state grant application service levels. Matt, that's you again.
And actually, I'm gonna jump in here.
It's Clayton then.
Yeah. So last week was a very momentous week because we also got the state grant applications from the state, and the deadline is going to be 3 days after our April board meeting. So unfortunately, we're going to be in a situation where we're going to be providing you the state grants for the first time that you really fully see them just before they're due. I will say, however, that there's not going to be really much decision-making when it comes to new services. We have a service reduction target that came with that. And so VTrans is asking us to reduce our overall rural budget by $289,000 for fiscal year 26. We have been considering changes to MyRide that we talked about at the last board meeting when you all authorized us to do some public meetings. We think that the likely changes there are going to cover about a third to a half of the savings necessary, depending on the pathway that we finalize there. But I just want to acknowledge that we're going to be in a situation where we're not going to be as collaborative as we want to be with the board on the application just because of the timing. I will say that in regards to the rural transfer, we did hear from VTrans that they would like for us to continue to include all rural in our state application. That includes for RCT with Stowe service. There had been some question about whether RCT would take over Stowe service for the 2025-2026 season. That doesn't look like it's likely to happen. If anything, I think that what we may see for 2025 and 2026 is us working with RCT and TVT to, you know, sort of jointly operate those if the transfer is still on board with happening. But so the grant application that we do this year, you know, we won't be considering new service, and the big decision for the board is going to be, you know, what we want, where we want our savings. And so we will, as much as possible, have a menu of options for next month, knowing that that menu is going to be somewhat limited, knowing that we have to submit it 3 days after the meeting. So that's really the update. I don't know if Matt or Tim have anything that they want to throw out to the board at this time.
I'll just add that, you know, I'm actively working on the grant application, so we're hoping to get it, you know, done sooner rather than later. I'm working with staff on the various documents that are required within the application. But as Clayton mentioned, we've been asked to reduce our request significantly. But in the capital is kind of, you know, we're trying to decide if that money can be shifted from low-no to diesel vehicles, and we can, that might help us get actually more buses than less, based on the unit cost for each one of those electric vehicles compared to the cost for a diesel. They've also asked us for a complete list of our current vehicle assets and their useful life benchmarks and how much they have left in their useful life for the application process.
I have an overview of the capital, but Clayton, do you want to give an opportunity to discuss operating before we move to capital?
Oh, why don't we, since you're ready, why don't we do capital? I'm gonna duck out and I'll be right back. So if you go ahead and do that, Matt.
Okay. So our FY26 capital budget, which was approved back in December, I'll start with urban. Urban was a $17.6 million capital budget, with $11.5 million of that coming from the Lono program for buses, infrastructure, equipment, and training. So staff's assumption here is that 11.5 million is no longer available to us for these projects, and so FY26 capital ask would not include those Lono projects. That leaves 6.2 million from the existing capital budget which was for non-Lono projects. That included 3 diesel buses, which totals $2 million, roughly. We may increase that to account for the 7 replacement electric buses that were identified, so that we can continue to turn over our fleet and retire these older buses. We have 1.7 million for our paratransit cutaway fleet. This is some catch up from FY24, which was a short year in capital, and we had actually no revenue vehicle capital other than what was made available through carbon reduction program. So we had to make a decision not to replace any ADA paratransit cutaways. So we're looking at 25 as a catch up year. Facility improvement projects from the 5339 application slate, depending on whether there's a NOFO announcement before the state grant application, those may be included in this, but that may also be something that we have to discuss with VTrans as a potential mid-year amendment. Really, we would be seeking state matching funds for those, since we would be seeking the federal funds ourselves. The budget also has roughly $650,000 in maintenance, parts, support equipment, and non-revenue vehicles identified in the budget. And then we also have $100,000 for new accounting system software. So likely removing those Lono projects, we would have a capital budget that's likely in the $6 million range. I will note that we had a previous estimate for the HVAC overhaul project that I listed over previously, that our A&E team has indicated that the estimate that we got previously may be substantially higher than what we should actually expect. So that project may come down. We had 1.36 million in the FY26 capital budget, so that could come down. So as broad strokes, or the highlight key takeaways here, Lono projects are coming out. We're looking to substantially invest in our main facility, which is midlife, needing quite a bit of overhaul. And then we may look to increase our diesel bus ask from the 3 that are currently identified. Any questions about our urban capital before I move on to rural? So rural has a current budget of roughly $2.5 million. There are no Lono projects in the rural capital budget, so I don't expect any changes needed for that. Right now we have 10 cutaways, 10 replacement cutaways. Those were identified as LPG cutaways. I would say that in light of recent news, those will be fuel type to be determined. We may look to purchase more gas cutaways, or we may continue to evaluate the LPG program, which could possibly yield some savings over gas for us. We also have a replacement medium duty cutaway identified for seasonal service. This would be replacing an older Sugar Bush Gillig bus that we have since retired. We have an expansion minivan for Cider, who is, my understanding, is picking up more work for us and needs a new vehicle, or an additional minivan in our lease fleet to them. And then finally, roughly $200,000 for facility projects, which includes planning and acquisition activities for a new Central Vermont facility, passenger amenity improvements, spare parts, and support equipment. So I do not expect that budget will change unless we get ballpark capital figures from VTrans as to what we can expect to receive. And if that's wildly different from that, we may need to right size our request. But that is our rural capital request at the moment.
Thank you. Chapin, are you going to ask a question? No. Okay. Any questions or comments? Okay. Thank you for the information. Yeah.
Thank you.
Clayton, let's talk legislative updates and disaster preparedness.
Yeah. So for the legislative update, we have seen the draft of the fiscal year 26 T-bill coming out of House Transportation Committee. And I can tell you that it does include two sections that would be changed as part of the rural transfer. The first section is section 2 of our chapter, and that lays out our area of operation. One of the things that will be changed is that our area of operation will be designated as urban fixed route, and then beyond urban fixed route, we will go through the state grant application process. I think that there's pros and cons to this. From a good governance perspective, I like the fact that whoever is providing the service has to go through the grant application process and convince VTrans and hence the legislature that it makes sense. There will no longer be us providing service just because the statute says that. My impression is that the legislature has seen this very positively and sees this as GMT's commitment to working with the state on providing the most cost-effective transit. And so that will go to the appropriations committees or the appropriation committee in the House and before going to the floor. And so, looking at our local processes, those are still happening. For the rural transfer, what we don't know is that we still haven't heard from RCT and Tri-Valley Transit regarding whether they are wanting to accept the service. One of the things that I like about having this be through the state grant application process is essentially they would have to apply for it if they wanted it. And so, this will be a situation where, TVT or RCT would have to, take steps, in order to, and if they didn't want to apply for it, I think that there's protections there. Trying to delicately discuss that. So before I move on to disaster planning, I just want to give folks an opportunity to ask questions regarding what's happening at the legislature.
What if nobody applies for the rural areas in their grant application?
Then VTrans have an interesting problem to solve. If there's nobody that wants to cover a certain area, so I'm sure that then they would go into arm twisting mode.
Okay.
But I will say that, you know, sort of one of our goals, was having a reset with the House Transportation Committee in particular. The last session, they were not particularly, fond of GMT, and I do believe that we've had a nice reset. And the Craftsman Group has really been helpful with that. Just last night, I got a nice email from Matt Walker, the chair of the House Transportation Committee, indicating that he's really happy with how GMT has participated this year. But of course, GMT has participated by being in alignment with VTrans, primarily when it comes to our the budget request, and also staying neutral on rural transfer. So there haven't been issues of conflict, which I think is helping them see us more positively. But unless there's something else, then I'll shift to sort of the disaster planning.
I guess we can't avoid it.
Yeah. So for disaster planning, and this is something that I really, in hindsight, wish that we had started in November, is that, the last week has made us really realize how swiftly things can change and how swiftly we can have to accept new normals. And the thing that I think that we need to be prepared for is for there to be a sudden change in funding level, whether that's because of the challenges that we heard about earlier in this meeting with past LONO funding, or whether that's, because the new administration has issued an executive order reducing or limiting transit funds. We're going to be in a situation where we may have to make decisions in a matter of days that will be very difficult, and we're going to need to have a plan in place for that. Previously, like I had known that Project 2025's goal was to zero out federal transit funding so that transit funding would be, paid for by states and cities. And the news from the last week just made it more real that may be something that could particularly happen. So I'm really happy that we have somebody with the experience and skills of John Moore on staff, who I've tapped to help us, put some of these straw plans together. For our April leadership meeting, we'll have some basic outlines for us to take a look at, in the hopes that then by April we could have something to share with the board. But the danger of our situation is that depending on where our cash flow is, just from our normal cycle, if we were to suddenly stop getting federal funds, it would not be long before we would, have cash flow and solvency, issues, hence the need for rapid decision making. And so, Tasha.
Oh, thank you so much, Clayton. Well, that all's very daunting. I guess the question is, would you, with rapid decision making, would you do like emergency board meetings, or would you just be notifying what you're doing, given there's constraints which really constrain how you can respond, or what's the kind of process? Thank you.
Yeah, my hope would be that, nothing happens at all between now and us when we have a plan together. And that if something does happen without a plan already, approved by the board, that then we would definitely have an emergency meeting to come up with one. My hope would be that we would have something in place so that if there was a change, we would, maybe we would want an emergency meeting anyway, just to be able to discuss, but at least we wouldn't have to create a plan. It would be more like, hey, let's just review this once more before we implement. And to give you an idea of, our initial looks that John has done, if we were to suddenly lose federal funding, I mean, we're talking about cutting 73% of our service. So it's, you know, it would be a very quick changed and lowered service and a very quick, you know, getting people off our payrolls before we become insolvent. And we have Charlene and then Michael.
So I just want to ask if you can define not be long before those impacts happen. Like, is it something we have 5 days or that we have 2 weeks before the service has to be cut? And I kind of wanted to ask if we're making sure the Teamsters Union is fully engaged in these kind of disaster plannings, because it feels like that is exactly the kind of group that we want to have be vocal if something goes wrong, and we want to have them geared up to be vocal.
Absolutely. So depending on where we are in our, you know, our normal business cycle, it could be, you know, just a handful of 2-week payroll periods before we would be insolvent. And so that's why I think that we would want to be able to make a decision within, you know, 5 to 10 business days, so that we would then be able to get to, you know, that sustainable place before becoming insolvent. And I don't know if Nick, if you want to expand upon that, or just kind of leave that in general terms.
Yeah, I mean, on average, we probably have about 2 months or a month and a half. I think we'd be able to last. You know, the urban side has a roughly $2 million or so restricted net position. That's sort of our rainy day fund. The rural side has a much healthier unrestricted net position. You saw today a little over 3 million. Now that doesn't mean all of that's in cash as well. So that's equity terms. But if you go to the back of the audit, I have a sort of management imposed designation where we pull out some of the illiquid assets, which lowers that amount to what I feel is the more liquid part of our asset side of our balance sheet.
Thank you, Nick. Mike.
Yes, Clayton, in terms of, you know, the disaster mode, I assume once we move, if we go in that direction or have to go in that direction, I would hope that we'd also consider, I know you said no new routes. It seems to me if we're in a disaster mode, we should look at all options, not just cutting or slightly reimagining, but, you know, there have been changes over the last 10, 15 years in terms of density of population and throughout the sort of greater Burlington area. I would hope we would also be able to think of, if we have to cut, we also can, especially if we're going to be driven more by local funds and state funds versus federal funds.
Yeah, I think that, Mike, one of the things that you bring up is that reducing 73% of service may be harder than recreating 28%. And so I think that you're right. One of the things that we're going to be looking at is whether the right approach is sort of just to, you know, to reimagine from scratch as opposed to, you know, whittle down from what exists. And awesome.
Yeah, I guess I was just wondering, I mean, do we have written into our contracts, our, you know, any various contracts we have? I mean, I'm sure we have force majeure clauses, but do we have anything in terms of what happens if the federal government abandons us in such a way, or is that anything like that in our contracts? I mean, this is unprecedented, obviously.
Yeah, and so when you look at our like labor contracts, you know the methodology is going to be, you know, layoffs. And when you look at our service contracts, you know, one of the things that is going to be really both heartbreaking and critical for us is that whatever our new service is, you know, knowing that to keep us within our financial constraints, limiting the ADA service areas, you know, this is going to have to be one of the things that we, you know, really look at, and that would mean potential changes to our agreement with SSTA. I would imagine that just about all of our other contracts though have, you know, like the ability to end. And I think that that's one of the requirements. Matt, we have that built into just about all the contracts that we enter in as an ability to escape, right?
Yeah, I'd have to review the actual language, but I would assume the termination provisions, everything, would have some kind of language about, loss of funding.
Yeah. So I think that, you know, just about everything that we sign does include, you know, some emergency provisions, but.
Guess I was wondering if the emergency provisions were this dramatic. And I think we generally look at the federal funding as something consistent and safe.
Yeah, so. You want to become?
Yeah,
I have to do so.
okay, so to me, this is a national crisis, among others, nationally. This crisis is every day, as everybody knows. It's ongoing. So there's going to be a national reaction. So it's not just GMT, obviously, it's everybody, you know, across the country. So as the Vermont organization, we should really be in close touch with our congressional delegation and our governor and so on. I mean, it calls for a national response.
Totally agree. You know, I think that one of the things that we should probably pre-warn the Attorney General's office, you know, that this may be something that, you know, would be coming down the pike that we would want them to join. I'm sure that there would be a lawsuit that the other states would be doing as well. And, you know, I have to imagine that, you know, every major metropolitan area in the country would be totally, you know, up in arms if suddenly, you know, 5307 funding were to, you know, become non-existent. I don't know how, you know, New York City, LA, Chicago, you know, operates.
Austin, do you have a new question or just an old hand? Okay. Related, unrelated. Oh, Charlene, just 1 second. How is our nonprofit arm going?
To be completely honest, I have lost track of that. I'll go back around to Ed and ask him, you know, where we stand with getting the IRS recognition of that.
Okay. Thanks, Charlene. And then Paul.
Just my stupid little worry. They have been reaching out and taking money that has already been allocated. I hope that we are moving stuff out of the accounts that it's deposited in federally so that can't happen unexpectedly.
Yeah. So my understanding is that, you know, we don't have anything that could be clawed back. Yeah. Paul?
Go ahead, Paul.
I guess this is such an important issue. I'm hoping that we can keep all the staff fully updated on this. And I think the point of including the union in some meetings as we consider changes would be also very important.
I totally agree, and I'm sorry that I forgot to respond to that part from Charlene. I can tell you that my desire would be for them to be present. I also know that we're going through a difficult negotiation with them right now. And I'm not sure that having them actually at the table for some of these discussions will be helpful, which hurts my heart as a labor-focused progressive.
If this is impacting transit across the nation, it seems like Teamsters would be involved across the nation, no? Yeah.
I would imagine that they would organize and rally en masse. But I think the other complicating factor, however, is that the Teamster membership by and large has been very supportive of the new administration. So that may complicate their response.
Okay. Go ahead, Charlene.
Just one more part, if we do have to sue to get funds that have already been promised to us back, the Teamsters as part of the union are one of the ones that has major standing in one of those suits. So we just want to be mindful of that and how we communicate that.
Absolutely.
Okay.
All right, Tasha.
Thanks, Tasha. I'm not sure where else to go with this. I appreciate that GMT John are working on some ideas behind the scene. Okay.
I do look forward that there will be someday when we will have meetings where there's not these long pauses of sorrow and despair. That will have long pauses because you will be like, whoa, that is so awesome. It's going to take a moment for us to acclimate about how incredible that new thing is going to be. Someday we'll be there.
Yeah. I don't know why I let you talk me into being chair during this time period, Clayton.
I feel bad.
Austin, I blame you.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, with no more discussion on that, I'm sure there's just not a lot to discuss, but a whole lot of feelings related to it. We can move on to committee reports. And finance, I'll start with you. Is there anything in addition to the audit that you want to share?
Just one small thing. We did review some financials, and we I think it's happy to report that at least at this point we're on track to meet our budget.
Okay, thanks. And I know workforce didn't meet, so Bob, you're off the hook. And governance meets.
So I can, governance did meet, and we talked a little bit about the statutory changes that could be included in the T-bill. And we'll also be meeting later this month to go over some draft rules.
Thanks. And performance. Gosh, I can never, oh, it's Tasha, and she just left.
Yep, and they had canceled this month's meeting.
Okay. Am I missing anything besides leadership?
The retirement committee, I think, met, but I don't know if they have anything worth reporting.
Yes, we met in February, I believe. Happy to report that all of the retirement funds are doing really well. We do have one fund on watch. Thankfully, there's not a tremendous amount of plan assets in it, but we're keeping our eyes on it with the possibility of switching if the performance doesn't improve. We're also working to have the investment advisor come on site in April to all of our different locations to meet in person with employees that would like to have those meetings. So.
Thanks. And leadership, I'm trying to review my notes, which are poorly added, but we did meet. We had a legislative update, so nothing that we haven't really talked about here. Did the transit worker protection get added? Did it make crossover, Clayton? Do you know?
It did not. I'm sorry, I should have brought up during the legislative update. It is not going to meet crossover this year, and so it does not look like it will be enacted.
Huh. Okay. So we have another year to play with that one. And then we did talk about some rider engagement committees as JEDI committee decided to kind of transition to rider engagement committees that would be grounded in our one per region. So a Washington County Rider Engagement Committee, a Chittenden County one, and a Franklin Grand Isle. The rural ones would contain some partner agencies as well as riders. And then Chittenden would be a little bit more rider focused and less partner. Or there'd be a separate partner committee, correct? Did I get that right?
Correct. And so the thought was that in Chittenden County that there would be enough between riders and partners to have separate committees, but that we would start with consolidated in Franklin and Washington County.
Okay. And since I'm already talking, I get the floor. I'm going to say that one of the hopes is that those rider engagement committees will continue to be representative of our riders as we move away from JEDI to make sure that all of our riders and their needs are represented in those committees. And then we also continue to just kind of plan for a performance evaluation for our general manager to make sure that's on the books. So we'll be moving along there. And I think that was leadership.
And if I could add for performance, with Tosh's departure, there's been two main topics that performance has been considering. The one is a low-no strategy, which seems to, our low-no strategy probably is going to be a lot shorter moving forward, unfortunately. And the other item has been performance metrics. And the challenge there has just been that the performance metrics are really going to be tied in with our planning department. And of course, they've been, Chris and his crew have been, focused on the changes in the service. So it's just been a capacity issue there. So performance is going to need to find a new topic to replace low-no while it waits for capacity for metrics.
Great. I believe that's all the committee reports. And so we have a few minutes for any commissioner comments.
I think Judy has one.
Thanks, Judy.
Yeah, I just want to go back to what is the national issue? What if the federal government pulls the rug out from under all transportation entities in the nation, which it could happen. Why are we keeping this secret? We need to alert everyone. In other words, all the commissioners report to select boards, etc. And it seems to me that everybody should know that there's a huge threat. Because unless I've misunderstood, and I'd love to be corrected if I'm wrong, I really would, I'd be delighted to be corrected. So, but if it is true that there is such a threat, and this is national, somebody in this country, which may be us, needs to start jumping up and down and yelling and resisting and letting everybody know that this is happening. So I hear people really talking about, business as usual kind of issues like troubles in negotiations and little stuff, relatively speaking. Obviously these are all important issues, but our existence and the existence of transportation service in this country is enormous. So what are we going to do about it? Who's going to speak out? I'm waiting to hear.
I appreciate that perspective because I think what you highlighted is if we're not careful, we will be kind of operating on a defeatist, this is our new normal, instead of protesting against the changes. And so I do hear that.
Something that I was going to bring up during commissioner comment is that we will be having a media or a press conference today at 1 o'clock. Jamie should have, or I think Jamie did during this meeting, sent the invitation for those. Sorry that I did not think to have these sent to you all earlier. the original plan was to just talk about the service reductions, since we knew that today was going to be the vote for the service reductions. But I think certainly adding that there will be no more electric battery buses, will be something that we'll include. And other topics that we were going to touch upon would be the rural transfer, since there's been a lot of press interest in that. And also the end of our let them ride policy, which ended yesterday. And so it'll be a somewhat wide-ranging news conference at one today.
Thank you.
So,
Oh, I think Judy's waiting for an answer. What are we doing? And
Yeah.
and I'm not sure the answer. Clayton, I guess the bigger question is, is it going to be included? Are we going to mention this at the press conference? And then is there an opportunity for board members to, letter write or reach out to congressional folks or?
Certainly I will raise it as a concern that we're planning for and watching, and then what we want to do, else, beyond that, certainly happy to join in.
Okay, so need a moment to think about it.
Absolutely. I mean, it's like I said, this is something that I wish that we had started in November, but instead we started last week.
Okay. So more to come. Susan and then Mike.
Yeah, well, Judy raises such an important point. I just want to give it another minute for us to think about. I don't know if I'm very interested in trying to get a message out to my, constituents in Shelburne, and it would be, I think, better for me anyways, to maybe work with a couple of like-minded folks on the board to draft something that we can then tweak for our own communities. And I just agree with what she's saying, that we need to make sure people are aware of what's happening so that they can take whatever action they would like to. So I don't know, Mike, if you wanted to also comment on this, or if you had something else that you wanted to mention before I give the comment that I originally raised my hand for.
I would just briefly add that obviously, all of us are commissioners representing a certain municipality. I assume we all share updates with our select board or city council. In my case, I'm also on the city council. So after talking to or communicating with Clayton yesterday, we had our city council meeting. So I basically went through the 3 points that he outlined in the memo that he shared with us, which there also gives, because every municipality has to look at it. It's relevant to them regardless of, people may have different views on transportation, but everyone acknowledges that it impacts municipal budgets, it impacts municipal local economies, which then also generate revenue. It impacts the ability of their constituents to get to work or medical practices. So I would just encourage everyone to share these 3 points that Clayton included in his briefing to us with your select board member, to add it to the discussion of the next meeting. We had a brief discussion on it yesterday, and actually one question came up about the right off the bat, the special assessment. Is that something that's OBE, or because it's something that we factored into our budget right immediately? As an example, it starts making questions. What are the implications for local budgets? So I think that's a venue I would encourage everyone to use as just a responsibility to your community or your municipality.
Do you think
on the special assessment, if I can, just on the special assessment, since it immediately came up in terms of we looking at our budget, is that something that's still in play, Clayton, or is this all OBE?
It's still in play. I can tell you that it's not clear to me whether we will have the time or desire to do a buyout. We've sort of heard from the Teamsters that they don't seem to be super interested in a buyout. of the 8 communities that would need to vote on it, 3 have voted in the affirmative. And so I will be reaching out to the other 5, asking them, that they still need to, proceed with the decision.
All right, Susan, original question.
Yeah, so again, not to distract from this really important point that Judy was making, but I did want to comment on sort of the main highlight of today's meeting, for me anyways, was just to express appreciation for the staff and the outstanding work that they've conducted over the year in facilitating the audit and in leading to the clean audit opinion. So it's just a really great outcome that I think we should acknowledge, because it spares us all from, having to deal with other sort of financial management issues. So I just wanted to thank staff for that.
Thank you for saying that out loud, and I'll echo that I've been on the board. The audits have always been kind of remarkably clean and well done, and I hope not to have taken that for granted, but thank you.
And I appreciate Susan's comments, and it's appropriate for today because it's Transit Worker Appreciation Day today, a day that we cut service and are discussing icky things. To help overcome this, we have about $1,300 worth of junk food being distributed to our various locations today to say thank you.
Awesome. Well, I'll extend the appreciation to all the transit workers. I don't know about the junk food part, but that's just the health educator in me. Any other comments? So want to leave on Susan's positive note. Okay, so the press conference is at 1 today, in person or Zoom?
Both.
Okay.
Yeah, so that we already know that some news organizations will be here in person in the boardroom, and then others will be able to join via Zoom.
Awesome. So join if you can, everybody. And my goodness, thank you all for all the thoughts and ideas and opinions and guidance you bring to this board. And thanks to all of GMT for all the hard work that everybody's doing. And with that, I will definitely entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll move that, Amy.
Thanks, Susan.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mike. I see the second. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Abstentions? Wonderful. Enjoy the sunshine and the warming temperatures. And thanks for all you do.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everybody.